1873. Lamps went out in order. The tide forgot to bring anyone back. In March 1873, the lighthouse at Cape Pine learned a new silence. The keeper, John Prowse, had kept his log through gales and calms. Lights sighted, fog hours, signals answered. Each dusk he could count the outport over the Tickle. 12 windows on the western hill, 3 lamps along the stage head, the orange of a kitchen fire. On a Tuesday, after the ice drifted off like a herd turning its backs, the lamps went out in sequence. Hill, stage, kitchen, then nothing but the slow eye of the light itself. Prowse wrote it down as he wrote everything, extinguished one after another, no wind sufficient to scold a flame. At dawn, the mail boat Belladonna nosed in with the tide. She found skiffs tied, oars shipped, flakes standing with split cod laid like pages, salt already learning the words. No smoke, no dogs. A door banged because a door must. Prowse and the skipper walked through rooms. Beds turned back for bodies that had not used them, a kettle that had forgotten to steam. On the table, a testament lay open to Corinthians, a flat beach stone keeping the page as if the sea had placed its own paperweight. The clock in the schoolhouse had stopped at 2 shy of midnight with the key in it. They called the place Gannet Cove on charts and Cat's Cove when talking quick. Today, it read neither. The church bell, brine green and sure of itself, had swung and settled sometime in the night. Verdigris lay in a crescent where the tongue had kissed the lip. On the beach, footprints ran to the water in rows and refused to return. No boats were missing. A child's wool cap, braided with sand, sat in the path like the period at the end of a sentence that would not finish. Prowse tried the telegraph and found the wire humming without message, the way a throat hums after a name it cannot remember. He closed the ledger and wrote a single word on the day's line. Vacant. News travels on water in outport country. By the second day, 2 boats from St. Shots and 1 from St. Vincent's lay off the cove, men standing in their socks on thwarts. They went ashore in pairs, touching nothing until touching became necessary. The stages smelled right, tar, liver, salt. But the cutting boards were too clean, knives rinsed and laid spine to spine. On the flakes, split fish waited mid-turn, flesh up when weather wanted flesh down. A child's slate in the school showed the copy line in a round hand. Tide knows its own road. Someone had drawn a little house beside it and then erased the door. In the church, the hymn numbers still declared last Sunday's courage. The font held 2 capelin and a teaspoon of ash. A woman's shawl hung over the back pew, drying from no rain. In the kitchen of the 3rd house, a loaf sat wrapped in towel and still soft at its heart. The heel cut for someone who had not come back to finish. A pot of berries stood on the sill, beginning to fur. The oilskin coats on nails carried the sea, but not the day. Down by the Tickle, Prowse paced the stones as a keeper will. He found rope scars new on the bollards and a smear of tallow on one post at shoulder height, as if a lamp had been set there for the dark to find. The punts were present, the big trap boat too, and a coil of warp lay with its tail in the water like a thought going elsewhere. A gull stood on the gunwale and did not lift when men passed. Gulls know when food and noise go together, and today the noise had changed its mind. On the cliff path, the grass showed 2 lines where many feet had chosen single file. They led to the look-off over the Narrows. They did not lead back. In the margin of the school register, a pale hand later wrote, "Not in any child's ink. All accounted for." The cove became a problem to be copied. The magistrate at Trepassy arrived with constables and a survey chain, followed by a priest who carried the parish book in a flour sack. They made an inventory, as if numbers could knit bodies back. 12 houses, 3 stages, 4 flakes, 1 school, 1 church, 15 skiffs, 1 trap boat, 2 dogs' chains without dogs. They counted spoons, sacks, salt. The priest opened the book and, where he should have added baptisms, wrote a line that kept reappearing even after he sanded it. "Vacant of souls, God see to it." The telegraph at Headland tapped its own small heart through the fog to St. John's. Outport Gannet Cove deserted. Stop no vessels missing. Stop request advise. The answer took its time and broke in the weather. A sentence full of holes that still managed to ask for the list of names. Prows copied from the last census and left spaces where marriages and children had likely happened since. The spaces looked too clean. In the school, chalk marks on the floor showed figures as if a lesson had been underway when the lesson turned into walking. Along the baseboards lay a thread of kelp as tidy as twine, stretched door to door like a line that did not wish to be crossed. Wind wrote things down no constable could. Sand on the path gathered in crescents that changed position when nobody looked. A flakeboard creaked once an hour, whether breeze asked or not. In the church, a draft moved the hymn numbers forward to a blank frame. At the Narrows, the tide stood against itself and left a collar of weed halfway up the rocks, not the height of any tide the old men would swear to. By evening, the inventory made sense and the place did not. He set his seal on the church door and closed the school with the iron hasp used at Christmas. The sound carried too far. Prowse wrote in his lighthouse log, "Village still present, people absent, wind persistent at the business of notation." They searched the way coast people do, by making a circle and listening inside it. Dories ranged along the headlands to Chance Cove and St. Bride's. A schooner from Fermeuse lay to and blew 3 long notes that meant, "Are you there?" In the fog, the horn came back as a smaller thing, as if distance had trimmed it with scissors. Men fired a flare and watched it paint the vapor red while gulls held their wings still. A dog from Admiral's Beach, brought because dogs settle arguments, nosed the planks, whined once, then lay down. On the outer rocks, someone had set 3 piles of white stones in a line that pointed not to the Narrows, but out to the wide, past the bellbuoy. Fresh kelp was braided across 2 cottage thresholds and knotted at knee height, as sailors bend with the tuck turned wrong. The priest said a prayer over it. The constable wrote ornament. In the trap skiff, a coil of warp was wet in the middle, dry at the ends, as though it had been lifted, held, and set down by a hand that did not share the boat. The tide book showed nothing that explained the weed collar up the cliff. By evening of the 3rd day, the schooner's boat took soundings across the mouth and found the bottom deeper by a fathom than last charted. The line came up with grey clay that smelled of eggs. a smell rock keeps for its secrets. The skipper said, "Slide," and spat into the scuppers and tied another knot in his worry string. Prowse walked the ridge and counted breaths between horn and echo, and got a number that did not match the distance as he knew it. He tried again and came up shorter. Fog closed, opened, closed, the famous kind that edits maps. In the night, a single bell rang once from no buoy and once from the church at the same time, a trick bells are not hired for. If any answer rode the sea, it turned its face. Explanation is a kind of weather, and it settled hard. Men with straight edges from St. John's arrived and unfolded charts like tablecloths, pointing to faults that ran offshore, to banks that creep, to the habit ice has of shouldering a cliff until the cliff remembers how to fall. They said a slide might have pulled a standing wave through the tickle at a bad hour, made the water climb the path like a visitor, then set it down again. Others said gas from peat, a breath that puts people to sleep in barns and boats. A merchant with a tall hat blamed Americans and their vessels that collect crews without asking. A Frenchman blamed English press. An Englishman blamed the French for still existing. The priest did not blame, he sorted blankets. Elders said the Narrows had voices before there were houses and would have them after. That in certain winds the sea goes out to count itself and returns shy of the number. That capelin run early some years and bring strangers behind them. A Micmac family from the interior down to trade fur listened without correcting anyone and traded their tea for salt as arranged. A school inspector quoted statistics that kept a calm head while his hand shook. The magistrate declined to put "bewitched" in a report, and so bewitchment remained where it prefers to live, in talk. At the lighthouse, Prowse tried to make a clean page of it. He set down dates, tides, barometer, fog hours, bearings of echoes. The numbers sat like polite men at a wake. On certain nights from the gallery, he could see a chain of faint lights on the hill where the 12 windows had been. No flames, only suggestions, as if fog had chosen to rehearse the village. They would shine, dim, shine again, then give up imitation. He told no one. Keepers are paid both for the light they show and for what they do not say. The telegraph clicked less each day. The last message about the cove read only, "Filed, vacant." After the searchers left, the place learned small motions. The shawl in the back pew shifted one pew forward and back again by week's end. A spoon on a sill began pointing seaward each morning, landward by dusk, as if keeping the tide in a private pocket. The school clock, unwound and left, lost 5 minutes a day until the night the moon went thin. Then it gained them back in a single hour and stopped at the same 2 to midnight. A string of capelin hung under a stage dripped oil in a line that made letters on the plank below. No tongue the priest owned, but regular as script. Prowse took to sweeping the church once a week. He found sand in the aisle in shapes of little feet. Heel and toe careful, not many. Headed toward the door. On the look-off, where the path quits being path and becomes cliff's edge, the grass did not grow for a boot's width that spring. Green on both sides, brown in the middle, a lane for air, At the water's edge, a braid of kelp reappeared despite his cutting, spliced with moss and 2 threads of red yarn from somebody's cap. The bell rope, tied in a thief's knot so it would not swing, learned to sway once at dusk and once at dawn and never otherwise. In June, fog lay so kind, sound fell out of it like water from cloth. From the gallery after midnight, prows heard the small accommodations of a village being made elsewhere. A latch lifted, a pot set down, a chair pushed in with the foot. No voices. He lit the lantern by duty and for the comfort it grants keepers alone. The light turned and counted the dark. On the hill where windows used to answer it, the fog made a geometry of pale rectangles, confused, then correct, then gone. He wrote none of that in the log, but on the day of St. Peter's, he drew a single square in the margin and shaded it lightly as if it were lit. Years make explanations respectable and stories patient. Charts were redrawn. The name Gannet Cove faded to a light type that map makers use for places with no post. The houses went down one by one to storms and salvage until the hill kept only stones where stoves had stood and a square of fern where the school had practiced order. Later, when government men with clipboards came in other decades to move outports on purpose, they stamped papers with a word that had already been written here without ink. Vacant. The stamp learned to travel. The word had started early. A museum in St. John's keeps Prowse's ledger open to March, a small neat hand ending on the long line. Vacant. Visitors lean, fog the case, and read names copied from censuses that never met the people they represent. In the drawer below the ledger lies a wool cap braided with sand that still turns red again when rain remembers it. The church bell, recovered years later by men who wanted metal, hangs in a shed at Admiral's Beach. Its verdigris crescent is still the size of a thumb and still exactly the color of cold water. Walk the headland at evening, and the light will find you the way it finds everything, with patient arithmetic. Look across the tickle and count the windows the fog offers. You will be right, and then one more will appear where there is no wall. The tide will set a collar of weed halfway up the rocks and then be ashamed and take it back after dark. In Caplin season, a thread of kelp will appear across the footpath, neatly spliced. On still nights, a bell will ring once with no church to apologize for it. No voices, only wind reading what the sand wrote, and the long, accurate revolving of a light that keeps its ledger even when nobody answers the arithmetic of lambs. The village learned vacancy the way paper learns words. First faint, then sure, then part of the coast's memory of itself.